When night falls out in the African bush, nature can be very, very calm. This sound of silence is a permanent background for every tiny sound. And in the space between sounds and silence, there is a potential for music.
The way that these three women are making fufu, you notice the way that the woman always brings a finger out at the last second. In fact, this woman is concentrating more on the silence in between the beats of the fufu pestles, because she's literally listening to the silence, and she puts her hand into the silence or into the gap in between the downbeat of the pestles. Africans listen to the silence and are as aware of the silence as the sound in music, and use the silence as a dimension in which they can improvise.
John Collins is an English writer and musician who's been living in Ghana for many years, studying the African sense of rhythm.
This particular game, he learnt it from one of his school friends. By rattling his teeth with his hands, he creates one rhythm, and then by moving his mouth, he creates a second rhythm. So basically, it's a sort of a body cross rhythm. This rhythmic awareness, it's not something that people are just born with. Like anybody else, they get their good sense of rhythm through training as children. Either they're on the backs of their mothers, or they play little rhythmic toys, or they have a lot of rhythmic games. Ampe is one rhythmic game. It's a sort of a competition in which the two people face each other, and they do a very complicated dance or jump. And when they land, they kick their feet forward. And depending on which foot comes forward, one of the people wins and the other loses and drops out, and then another girl takes over. And they go around in a circle and see who's the winner. One of the ways that children in Africa are taught cross rhythms is with the use of small rhythmic toys like this one. And in Ghana it's called the televi or the esratawa. And it's two small gourds which are dried, and the insides are taken out and filled with small seeds. So they shake like this. And a bit of string tied to hold them together. This plays two rhythms. One is like this, shaking rhythm, and the other is this rhythm. You bounce it on the top and catch it on the rebound. I'll exaggerate that sound. Da-da, da-da, da-da. That's the rebound effect. And the rebound effect links up with the first rhythm. So when you play these two rhythms, this is where they link up, they intersect. And the children have expressions which goes with the rhythm. They don't hear it clickety-click, clickety-click, or something like that. They hear it Tel Aviv Berekete, 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 Halogute, 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 Tel Aviv Berekete, Tel Aviv Berekete.
Combined with talent, this early training of complex cross rhythms can lead to impressive results. These 4 young kids came all the way from the countryside in the far north to earn their living as musicians in the big city.
Our music is called African Showboys. We come from Ghana, north part of Ghana. And our hometown is in Baku. And my name is called Jacob. My age is 11 years old. Isaac Saba, 8 years old. My name is Joseph Saba, 11 years old.
Napoleon Saba, 14 years old.
They play the gonje, the fiddle, and the maracas, which they throw, as you can see, in a very complicated way, forming a very complex rhythm.
This is the central square in the village of Alakboshi, where a session of traditional drumming and dancing is going to take place. As we arrive, the village chief bids us welcome and sacrifices some local gin to the earth gods, a ceremony expressing the close contact and harmony with nature.
Individually, it's very simple, very simple to play. Just take it and play by your own. But you can't play by your own. You have to get it together. By getting it together, well, you get it more complicated and more sophisticated.
When combined, the overlapping rhythms form a complex structure, and it's from this entirety the actual music is born. That's why it's been said that rhythms are to Africans what harmony and melody are to Europeans. As a Westerner, when you stand in the middle of the music and listen to all the rhythms, it may sound very chaotic. But if you keep listening, after a while you'll notice that the different overlapping rhythms form one single composite pulse, almost hypnotic.
You can hear it very clearly from a distance in a drumming group. You can hear this pulse. The pulse and the hidden rhythm are not played by any one particular person. It's the resultant of everybody's efforts. It does, in fact, take a life of its own. It's almost like the music is playing you rather than you're playing the music. You cannot separate the individual from the situation, and in African music you leave gaps in the music purposely to get people to participate in. I mean, the whole idea about African music is that everybody participates, everybody can move, everybody can dance. When you're dancing, you're using your feet are on the ground, but you're doing complicated cross rhythms, and African music joins the head and the feet. What happens is that the dancers fill out the rhythms. The body moves actually generally in the silences of the music. Whereas Europeans think that African music is wild, frenzied, freak out, uncontrolled, when you actually go to Africa, you see something very different. There is, of course, wild music in Africa. There's also very cool music, but we've tended to focus on the wild aspects of it as symbolizing Africa, the primitive, you know, the music of Tarzan. To play one rhythm, you have to have a certain amount of discipline. But African music is based on polyrhythms, and you can't play it without discipline. It's impossible. Even if you take the most wild music of all, the possessional cults, music that's intended to put people into trance, disorientate them so that they become possessed by spirits. you would think, well, this is wild, orgiastic music, and, you know, it's everything we think African music is. But at the back, or in the center of that music, are the master drummers. They can drum in the spirit, they can drum out the spirit, and they're looking very cool and relaxed. And they can even, you know, be playing very, very wild rhythms and just joking with each other at the same time. It's almost effortless in some ways.
Ghanaian music hasn't remained as pure traditional drumming. This so-called high life style is an example of modern African music.
Now, when I'm playing, you probably notice that the music flows a bit like water, in the sense that the thumb and the first fingers are more or less equally proportioned in the music. The thumb doesn't dominate, the first finger doesn't dominate. They're playing counter rhythms. Just as you can have different drums playing different rhythms, each drum leaving a gap for another rhythm to speak. In other words, setting up a rhythmic dialogue between the different drums. They've converted this idea to modern instruments like guitars. So the different guitars will be having sort of conversations with each other as they're playing.
The wish to use Western instruments can take quite imaginative forms when you can't afford to buy them, as for this young guy, Susaliso.
He doesn't have anything to practice on, so what he's done in his spare time, and being a carpenter, is he simply made a set of jazz drums to practice on in a sort of gospel high life, which combine high life and hymns.
Now the drummer, you can try something for us now.
The move move towards modern ideas and instruments can also be reversed, so that modern music expresses itself in traditional forms, as in this very popular dance.
The village people in the Ewe land wanted to be able to play high life in the villages, but couldn't afford the electric instruments that high life is usually played on. So they started to play high life on their traditional drums, and then they called this bobobo. And the only modern instrument that they could afford was a trumpet or a bugle. As you can see, the bobobo dance is a very sexy dance. There's a lot of pelvic movement. And in fact, the whole point about this dance is it's for boys and girls to get to know each other. You know, later on maybe they'll get married or something. So it's where you meet your girlfriend.
Bo, yeah. Because the music play, you have to move your body. Move your body. And then in my language, you say bo. Bo, that's bed down. When you bed down like that, then you bed down, you can shake your bum, you know, like that. That's what we call, that's make it become bobobo. And then when bobobo is playing, you see old people too, they're sitting down behind, while relaxing. And when the music comes, they change, they go inside, they do their best, because it's like a body moving all the time, and shake your bum. Whether you have the small one or you have the big one, you have to move it.
This is Buchano village, at the shores of the Gulf of Guinea, not far from Accra. We're amongst fishermen who participate in a funeral.
The most important ceremony in a person's life is when they die, actually. All the family, all your connections, your family, relatives come together at the funeral, and a lot of dancing and families making arrangements, marriages are arranged, maybe quarrels are patched up and such like.
The dance is called panlogo, a rather free dance with room for all kinds of improvisation. In turn, the villagers sketch different parts of the dead man's life.
During funerals, death is converted into life for the people in the village. They get rid of all their emotions about death by enjoying themselves and doing crazy things, dressing up as women, cracking dirty jokes, getting drunk, boozing, playing music, dancing, all the things that you would think people shouldn't do at a funeral.
Wakekeeping is something that, we keep on the whole night, sharing the love with the person that we are missing at the moment. That's how we have wakekeeping, to be together with the person, to see the last moment, the last hour, to be with that person, to have very close contact before we get rid of the person. Like, okay, bye-bye, and have a nice time. Happy, sadness, they find each other together, like a husband and a wife.
This is the next day. The coffin is soaking wet. Having lived as a fisherman, the departed villager wanted to enjoy one last moment in the waves of the sea. Apparently, the fishermen are so drunk they can't even carry the coffin straight. However, their own explanation is that the will of the dead person is trying to postpone the ceremony, forcing them up and down the ditches. As he died young, he doesn't want to be put underground and leave life on earth. In some African languages, the word music doesn't even exist, because music is found everywhere. Even in modern African society, you can still find music and singing in a lot of working routines, hence making the work easier. The daily working routines and the pulse of nature form the background for African music, utilizing the space between sound and silence.
Silence is not silence. Silence is only potentiality, because in a particular silence, 1 million or 1 trillion things can be done. What Africa's been doing is been breaking down the idea of a single perspective in art, or a single rhythm, monolithic approach of Europeans. And what seems to be happening now is that as the world develops into a more multi-dimensional one, I mean, They know that Africa is the source of this new dimensionality in music. And then there's been the move of white culture to black dance rhythms, which creates more space in music by syncopating European music or opening up gaps, intervals within European music. Between the structures of the metronome beats, there's a space, a rhythmic space, which you can swing in, you can move in. You can call it swing or syncopation. And it was this awareness in music which enabled the black slaves to turn European music inside out. The Europeans didn't emphasize the intervals between the beats. I mean, it's basically umpa, umpa, umpa music, first and third beat. So in a way, what the blacks did is they colonized white music. And by bringing African slaves to Europe, the Europeans were really putting inside their own culture a cultural time bomb, which has taken several centuries to explode. I think, in a way, African music is sort of a gift to Western man, that, you know, it's a way out. It's another way of dealing with reality. It's not trying to dominate nature, dominate the universe. It's coming into harmony with the universe, which, of course, is a very ancient knowledge that we've lost temporarily.